to the big news, though, on the Boeing front right now. We are waiting for a statement from the FAA. We have heard, though, from the President of the United States on this, and also Boeing itself saying that after consultation with the FAA and the NTSB and aviation authorities and customers around the world, Boeing has determined out of an abundance of caution and in order to reassure the flying public of the aircraft safety to recommend to the FAA the temporary suspension of operations of the entire global fleet of 371 737 MAX aircraft. This coming from Boeing. Joining us now for the very latest on this is Peter Greenberg. He is CBS News with us right now on the phone. Peter, what do you make of this development? I mean, the entire global fleet here grounded for Boeing.
Well, we talked about this yesterday. The FAA was dragging their heels on this simply because they were reluctant historically to ground any sort of aircraft because of their sort of schizophrenic mandate when they were established by an act of Congress. They were given two roles: to either enforce and enact safety regulations and to promote the business of aviation. That's an internal conflict. They can't do both. And as a result, they've never been able to fully decide whether they're serving the public or serving the business of aviation. But when you have all these other countries around the world, from the United Kingdom to China, South Korea, and the numbers keep growing by the hour, banning this plane from their airspace, those countries effectively did that decision for the FAA. They essentially grounded the plane, and the FAA had no choice at this point but to succumb to the outcry around the world and at least order that banning for the moment.
So what do you want to know now? What would you like to hear from the FAA on this front?
Well, it's not just from the FAA, it's from Boeing itself, because we know there's a problem. We don't know exactly what happened. We will find out because both the cockpit voice recorders and the flight data recorders from both crashes have been recovered, and the laboratories are going to get that answers back to us very soon. That will give us an idea of the timeline of what happened, and then what can be done to fix it. Boeing seems to think that they can have a temporary fix on the software. That's what they did when they alerted U.S. airlines of this issue, and those pilots for those airlines were briefed on that procedure. But that's a short-term fix. We're talking about a bigger problem and a long-term fix. And until we can be assured that that fix has been implemented, those planes are probably not going to go anywhere.
As we went through the day, especially with Canada coming out, and just the flying public was not sitting still with this. You could just see it on social media, people wanting to be able to change their flights. We had Southwest coming out, allowing people to do that without a penalty. But now that you take 371 planes out of flying rotation, what is that going to mean for airlines and for frequent flyers?
Well, the bottom line for airlines, of course, is a huge revenue loss because airlines don't make money when planes are on the ground. But for passengers, you're going to have some serious capacity issues. People who are trying to change flights now may not be able to do that because they're trying to change flights to planes that may be already full. So the airlines are going to have to rejigger their schedule. They're going to have to reallocate planes of different capacity on certain routes to try to pick up that shortfall. It's not going to be an easy job for their schedulers.
Hey, Peter, quick question here for you. Just how long do you think these flights will remain grounded? I mean, is this something that we're talking about that will last a couple of weeks, a month, 2 months? I mean, what do you think the timeline is?
Well, let's go and backdate this for a second. Most investigations by agencies like the National Transportation Safety Board take a year before they give you a definitive probable cause and then recommendations for fixes to make sure those accidents don't happen again in the future. Obviously, I think this procedure will be accelerated, but at the very least, we're talking 2 to 3 months. I don't think anybody can move any faster than that.
Peter, Dan Roberts here. We did see the statement out now from Boeing that said, we support the action by the FAA as a precautionary measure. But President Trump kind of scooped both Boeing and the FAA by announcing it first during this press conference. I'm not trying to be too cynical here, but it seems to me like it's likely that Boeing is kind of just trying to save face, saying, oh, we support the action. It's more like Boeing's hand was forced here.
I would tend to agree with that. The optics here were not good for Boeing. Their initial response was not they didn't get ahead of the story.
Right.
And as a result, and remember, the FAA is acting right now with an acting administrator. So there's no leadership there that was going to move quickly here. So bottom line, it was the public that force this issue because it's an economic bottom line issue. When people are canceling their reservations and perhaps even more importantly, not making future reservations, they can follow those numbers pretty fast.
As somebody who's covered the travel industry for a long time, I mean, it's hard to find something completely analogous. But when this plane comes back, I mean, can it actually come back, even if they're able to update the software, given the flying public's fear around it? We already have Kayak adding features that allow travelers to filter out this plane when you're booking your reservations. Do you think that they will be able to right this situation for this fleet?
I actually think they can, and I'll tell you why. It's probably the most used airplane right now in the world. It has a very, very good safety record of previous models, ranging from the original 100 models all the way up to the Boeing 737-900. So I'm pretty confident they'll be able to fix it. The real problem you have is one of image, because the American flying public doesn't really distinguish between a Boeing model 700 of a 737 or a 737 MAX 8. And until someone can actually do that work for the public and explain the differences, there'll be some problems.
Peter Greenberg, CBS News travel editor, thank you so much for joining us.